Somewhere right now, someone is mistaking exhaustion for love and calling it devotion. He answers every call. He remembers every birthday. He covers every gap nobody else notices until it's already a crisis. He is, by every visible measure, the most reliable person in every room he enters. He has never once been left. He has also never once been chosen for who he is, rather than what he provides. He has never noticed the difference, not because he's careless and not because he's unintelligent. He's noticed less obvious things his entire life. He has simply never had a reason to look at this one directly. That's not an accident, that's the design. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the most capable, most reliable people are often the ones least able to feel loved, and you'll have a specific, uncomfortable test you can run this week that will tell you, for the first time, whether you're living inside the same pattern. Stay for that part. It's the one that actually changes something, and it's not what you'd expect. Pattern recognition, the substitution error. Here's the pattern, before we go anywhere near the psychology of why. There is a specific type of person, usually smart, usually high-functioning, usually the one everyone else quietly depends on, who has built an entire identity around being useful. Not charming, not charismatic, useful, the fixer. The one who solves it, covers it, remembers it, carries it, absorbs it before anyone else even registers there was a problem. From the outside, this looks like generosity, and sometimes it is. But underneath it runs on something colder and much older, a quiet, constant fear that the moment they stop producing, the relationship, or the affection, or the belonging stops with it. They will tell you honestly that they don't mind helping. That's true. What they won't tell you, mostly because they don't know it themselves, is that they have never once tested what happens if they stop. Not for a day, not for an hour. The test has simply never been run, and a part of them has made sure of that. If you've ever felt more secure being useful than being seen, this isn't a character flaw. It's an old survival strategy still running long after the danger that built it is gone, like a smoke alarm that never got uninstalled after the fire was put out years ago. Why this happens? Psychologists describe this as contingent self-worth, a sense of value that only activates under specific conditions. For the fixer, the condition is simple: I am valuable exactly as long as I am useful. The confusion isn't stupidity. It's a substitution error made so early and repeated so often that it stopped feeling like a choice a long time ago. By the time most fixers are adults, it doesn't feel like a belief they hold. It feels like a fact about reality. Here's the mechanism underneath it. Children who received attention primarily in response to usefulness, good grades, helpful behavior, emotionally managing a parent's mood, staying quiet so a stressed household stayed calmer, learn a specific equation early: worth equals output. And here's the part that makes it so hard to unlearn. This equation gets reinforced by something completely real, not imagined. Being needed activates dopamine and oxytocin pathways associated with genuine bonding. The relief a fixer feels when they solve someone's problem is not fake. It's the same chemical signature the brain uses for connection. So the brain files it under love, even though it's answering a completely different question, the question of usefulness, not the question of belonging. That's the trap in one sentence. The feeling is real, the label is wrong. And smart, capable people are especially prone to this substitution, because they are, by definition, extremely good at being useful. The exact skill that makes them indispensable at work, anticipating needs, solving problems before they escalate, carrying more than their share without complaint, becomes the exact mechanism that makes them unable to tell the difference between contribution and connection. Competence doesn't protect against this pattern. Competence is the fuel for it. There's a second layer worth nomming here, because it explains why this is so hard to catch from the inside. The substitution only works because it's partially true. Being useful does often lead to being appreciated. People do respond warmly when you help them. So the fixer isn't wrong that usefulness produces a real reaction. What they're wrong about is assuming that reaction is the whole relationship, rather than one layer sitting on top of it. Quick gut check, and I want you to actually answer this before you keep watching, not just nod along. When someone in your life needs nothing from you for a few days, does it feel like relief? Or does it feel like something's wrong, like you're missing information? Drop your honest answer in the comments. We'll come back to why that answer matters more than it seems. The feeling is real. The label is wrong. Case file: the fixer. Call him Tund. For 11 years, Tund has been the person everyone in his family calls when something breaks financially, logistically, emotionally. Broken car, missed rent, a sibling's divorce, a parent's hospital visit at 2 in the morning. Tund shows up. Every time, without fail. Not because anyone forces him to, because some part of him has never seriously considered the alternative. His wife has told him more than once that she loves him. He has never fully believed it, not because he doubts her honesty, but because he cannot separate her love from his usefulness. In his mind, the two have always been the same sentence, spoken so many times it stopped sounding like two different ideas. In therapy, when asked what would happen if he stopped being helpful for 1 month, no fixing, no favors, no covering for anyone in any part of his life, his exact words were, "I genuinely don't know if there'd be anything left for her to love." He wasn't fishing for reassurance. He wasn't being dramatic for effect. He was describing, as accurately as he could, what his nervous system believes is true. Here's what makes Tund's case so useful for understanding this pattern. Nothing about his marriage is actually failing. His wife is not withholding love, and there's no evidence anywhere in 11 years that she's ever loved him conditionally. The fear isn't coming from the relationship in front of him. It's coming from a story installed decades earlier, likely in a household where attention followed performance, running quietly underneath a relationship that has almost nothing to do with it. That's the part almost no one catches in themselves. The fear isn't current. It's inherited. And it's been running so long, it feels like present tense reality instead of outdated information from a completely different chapter of his life. What makes this worse, not better, is Tund's competence. Because he's so reliably good at fixing things, he's never been forced by circumstance to find out what happens without the fixing. The skill that should make his life easier has instead sealed the question shut for over a decade. Case file: the therapist. This pattern doesn't stop at people who lack insight. It runs just as hard, sometimes harder, in people who study minds for a living. Call her Amara, a clinical psychologist trained professionally to recognize this exact pattern in other people, to name it clearly in a session within minutes. She told us the hardest moment of her adult life wasn't a crisis. It wasn't a diagnosis, a loss, or a conflict. It was a weekend where nobody needed anything from her. No emergencies. No client to think through. No one to counsel, advise, or hold together. Just 2 quiet, empty days. She described it as the loneliest 48 hours of my life, in a house full of people who loved me. Her training gave her the vocabulary to name the mechanism with total precision. It did not, on its own, turn the mechanism off. This is the detail that matters most in this entire episode. Understanding a pattern intellectually and being free of it are two completely different achievements, and conflating them is exactly why so many otherwise self-aware people stay stuck for years. Amara could diagnose this condition in a stranger inside 5 minutes of conversation. She still couldn't sit in an empty weekend without her body registering it as a threat requiring immediate action. In studies on contingent self-esteem, researchers found something striking that lines up almost exactly with Amara's experience. When high-performing subjects were prevented from being useful to others for even short periods, self-reported feelings of worthlessness rose sharply, despite no actual change in how others viewed them, and no actual evidence of rejection anywhere in the environment. The threat wasn't real. The brain treated it as real anyway, and it treated it as urgent. If insight alone could fix this, the most self-aware people on Earth would be immune to it. They're not, which tells you something important and slightly uncomfortable. This isn't a knowledge problem. It's a nervous system habit built over years, reinforced thousands of times. And habits like that aren't dissolved by understanding them from the outside. They're dissolved by testing them from the inside repeatedly, until the old prediction stops matching reality. That test is coming up. But first, here's the exact distinction you need in order for that test to actually mean something when you run it. Case file, the manager. Before the framework, one more case, because this pattern doesn't only live in marriages and family systems. It shows up just as precisely at work, often disguised as excellence. Call him David, 34, a senior manager at a logistics company, the kind of employee every leadership team quietly relies on to hold a department together. When a project is behind, David absorbs it. When a teammate underperforms, David quietly does the missing work himself rather than escalate it. His reviews are outstanding. His stress levels are not. Here's the moment that revealed the pattern to him, not to a therapist, to himself, alone at his desk. His company offered him a promotion into a role with less hands-on firefighting and more strategic oversight. Objectively, a better job. Higher pay, more influence, less burnout. He didn't take it right away. He noticed with some discomfort that his first internal reaction wasn't excitement. It was a kind of quiet panic, a thought that arrived before he could stop it. If I'm not the one solving the daily fires anymore, will they still need me? That single sentence is the entire pattern, transplanted from a marriage into a career. David wasn't afraid of the new responsibilities. He was afraid of losing the one currency he'd built his entire professional identity around, being indispensable through effort. A promotion that reduced his day-to-day usefulness felt, to his nervous system, less like an upgrade and more like a threat to his standing, even though on paper it was the opposite. This is worth sitting with for a second because it shows how far this pattern travels beyond relationships. It's not just about being loved. It's about any context where a person has learned that their value is conditional on output, a marriage, a friend group, a family, or a career. The mechanism is identical every time. Usefulness feels controllable, so it becomes the only form of value the person trusts. David eventually took the promotion, but he later admitted the anxiety in the weeks before accepting it had almost nothing to do with the job description, and everything to do with a much older question he'd never consciously asked. Am I valuable, or am I just useful? Here's the reveal, and it's more precise than you give too much. Being needed is contingent. It requires ongoing performance, and it can be withdrawn the moment the usefulness stops. It's a transaction dressed up as a relationship, or, in David's case, dressed up as a career. Being loved or valued in the way that actually sustains a person is closer to being chosen. Valued for existing, not for producing. It doesn't fluctuate with output. Smart, capable people over-rely on being needed because it's a form of connection, or standing, that they can control through effort. If value depends on output, you can always work harder and manufacture more of it on demand. It feels safe precisely because it's earnable. You're never at the mercy of someone else's independent choice. Being chosen can't be earned through effort. It can only be received, which, for a lifelong fixer, whether in a marriage or a management role, is the single most unfamiliar and threatening experience available to them. Think of it like two different currencies. One, usefulness, you can mint yourself anytime you want, simply by working harder. The other, being chosen, you have no control over at all. It depends entirely on someone else's free decision. And if your entire sense of safety was built on the currency you can control, the other one doesn't register as love or trust. It registers as standing on ground that might not hold your weight. That's why so many high achievers describe love or job security or belonging as something they don't quite trust, even when the evidence in front of them says otherwise. They're not doubting the other person or the company or the relationship. They're doubting a form of value they've never had occasion to actually test. Here's a question worth sitting with before we move further, and I genuinely pause the video for this one. In your closest relationship or your current role, if you stopped producing anything extra for 30 days, no advice, no covering, no extra effort beyond what's required, would you know? With certainty, what would happen? Most people can't answer that question. That gap, the not knowing, is the entire problem in miniature. The experiment. Tun didn't fix this by becoming less helpful. He tried that briefly, and it made things worse. It just added guilt on top of the exhaustion, without answering the actual question underneath it. He fixed it by running a specific, deliberately uncomfortable experiment, showing up with nothing to offer on purpose, and watching what actually happened. David, without ever naming it this way, eventually ran a version of the same test, accepting the promotion and deliberately not jumping in to fix every small fire that came across his new team's desk. Here's the structure of that experiment, in a form you can run yourself, in whichever part of your life this pattern shows up in. Once a week, show up to someone who matters or to a role that matters with nothing extra to offer. No fix, no favor, no unrequested advice, no task completed beyond what was actually asked, just presence or just the role itself without the added performance. Then watch honestly for two things. 1. Do they stay anyway? Does the relationship or your standing actually hold? 2. Can you tolerate the discomfort of being wanted or kept for nothing extra you did? That second part is the real test, and it's the one almost everyone underestimates. Most fixers assume the risk is external, that people will leave, or that they'll be replaced once they stop overperforming. In practice, the harder part is almost always internal, sitting in a room or a meeting where you're not producing anything extra and resisting the urge to evacuate the discomfort by finding something, anything, to fix. The goal isn't to stop helping people or to stop doing good work. Helping isn't the problem, and neither is competence. The goal is to find out deliberately, in a low-stakes, controlled way, whether you are valued or only ever tested for usefulness. Most fixers have never actually run this experiment in their entire lives. They've simply assumed the answer and kept working to make sure they never had to find out for certain. If you're watching this and you already know, honestly, that you'd struggle to sit still in that room without reaching for something to fix, that's not a failure on your part. That's just accurate information about where you're actually starting from, which is more than most people ever get. The reframe. Tun didn't need to become less useful. He needed to find out if he was ever anything more than useful to begin with. David needed the exact same information, just wearing a different job title. That's the pattern, not weakness, not a character flaw. A test nobody ever agreed to run, running quietly in the background for years, deciding how safe a person is allowed to feel in their own relationships and in their own career. The uncomfortable truth is this: you cannot think your way out of contingent self-worth. Amara proved that with her own life, not just her clients. You can only test your way out of it, one small, deliberately uncomfortable moment of presence at a time, until the nervous system finally collects enough new evidence to update a file that's been running unchecked for decades. If this describes someone you know, or more likely described you, the move isn't to explain the psychology to them over dinner. It's to run the experiment yourself, quietly, before you say anything to anyone else about it. So here's your version of the test, in one sentence. This week, show up to one person or one part of your work with nothing extra to offer, and pay close attention to what your body does in the silence that follows. Tell us in the comments which part hit hardest, the fear that they'd leave, or the fear of what to do with yourself once they didn't. If this made sense of something you felt for years, the next episode goes even deeper. into why the people who overthink the most are often the ones with the clearest answer already sitting in front of them, and why they still can't take it. That's next on Mental Index.